Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits. And if the Marx Brothers had been alive in the middle of the 17th century, their names might have been Groucho, Harpo, Chico and Bubo. Or perhaps we might have just called them the Pock Marks. All very contrived, I can hear you say, and I can't disagree. But actually there is an interesting connection. Because the last feature film to include all three Marx Brothers, although not interacting with each other, was called The Story of Mankind, a film from 1957, where each of the Marx Brothers, three by that time, Groucho, Chico and Harpo, each played separate characters in different scenes. And amazingly, Harpo Marx was cast as Sir Isaac Newton. And, in a strange twist of fate, Sir Isaac Newton happened to live through the Great Plague, which ravaged much of the British Isles in the mid-17th century, most famously in London in 1665. Now, this is one of those wonderful things that only really happens when you look at the minutiae. Sir Isaac Newton, amongst many other things, came up with the general theory of binomial theorem. And I think the highest profile reference in popular culture to binomial theorem is in the Major General song, I Am the Very Model of a Modern Major General. You may remember, and on binomial theorem I'm teeming with a lot of news with many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse. So, we've gone all the way from the Marx Brothers to Sir Isaac Newton to binomial theorem to Gilbert and Sullivan. And in this episode of Musical Talk, amazingly, we're going to be talking about Gilbert and Sullivan a lot, even though, ostensibly, today's subject is Animal Crackers, the Marx Brothers film of 1930, based on their 1928 Broadway musical of the same name, with a score by Harry Ruby and Bert Kalmar. And you'll hear my theory that the writers of the stage play and the film version of Animal Crackers knew their Gilbert and Sullivan, and indeed I know that they did, and were riffing quite heavily, oddly, from the Mikado. So this episode is one beautiful circle, which started off with a very cheap gag on the word bubo and how that might just feasibly be one of the Marx Brothers. The Lord moves in a mysterious way his wonders to perform, I'm sure you'll agree. Now, you'll remember that last week we were talking about Animal Crackers as a stage musical from 1928, and we were also talking about the Marx Brothers and the amazing dynamic that they had, which is oddly still fresh today, 100 years later, more or less. In this episode, we're going to be looking specifically at the film of Animal Crackers, which is still a highly entertaining comedy musical film, which has left an enormous legacy, probably more in the field of comedy through Groucho Marx than in the world of musical theatre and film, but still it's a staging point on the way to what musicals were about to become on film only a few years later. This is a successful, surviving musical from an odd transitional period in the history of Hollywood when sound had been invented, but they just didn't know how to make film musicals. And we'll be picking up on some of that as well in this episode. Well, there we are. I hope that's tempting you into listening to this episode. I shall tickle you with a horse feather if it doesn't. And so, without further ado, let's hear that conversation about the 1930 film musical Animal Crackers, featuring the four Marx Brothers. In this case, Groucho, Chico, Harpo and Zeppo. Enjoy. Musical Talk. So let's talk about the film.
Yes.
What did you make of it, first of all?
I mean, I love this film. I've seen it more than once before, and of course, I first encountered the Marx Brothers via that radio series Flywheel, Shyster and Flywheel. So I know most of the main verbal sketches, yes. Although I'd never, until I watched, I think Animal Crackers may have been the first one I saw, or I think possibly The Big Store was the first one I saw, which was a much later one. And I'd never seen Harpo at all. I barely knew what he was or that he existed really until I saw The Big Store, and then suddenly the whole thing, the whole concept of what the Marx Brothers was just came together for me, you know. And of course, The Big Store's later and therefore more ambitious. It has more set pieces. It also has
less pacey fun though.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the later ones, isn't it? MGM ones, or have I got it the wrong way around?
No. Paramount is where they're zaniest, and then they calm down and become, if you like, they're wheeled in to do comedy stuff into another story, and they're wheeled out again. So yes, it's a later MGM one.
And The Big Store struck me as being from a different. Like, it has musical numbers in it, but it actually has a few really terrible or odd performers. There's particularly a woman I'm thinking of in The Big Store who does, who's clearly a great audio performer, but as a physical presence, she can't do it. It's very strange. She stands stock still and delivers her song nicely enough. But I was like, this is really weird. So it suggested to me that the sort of circles they were moving in weren't necessarily the full Broadway circles where people really could do everything. You know, they would knew how to appear on film. Maybe they just had sort of.
They came up through vaudeville. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
And I said, there's not so much revue, R-E-V-U-E, in the film Animal Crackers and the later films. But there's still plenty of it because they bring it. They are a revue act, ultimately. Even though you can string a show around them.
Yeah, fundamentally it's sketches. And so anyway, the basic dynamic of them versus society is delightful. It just is the main thing anyone who likes the Marx Brothers likes about them. The sophistication of the verbal comedy is tremendous, and the speed of the verbal comedy is the absolute thing, because it's difficult to do fast material like that. You know, there's obviously a diction thing going on, but there's also just a timing thing.
Yes.
And the timing is very sharp. It's possibly some of the sharpest verbal comedy that ever has existed. And of course, for me, it was familiar backwards through the lens of history. You know, people talk about Monty Python having been influenced by Spike Milligan and the Goon Show. And the Goon Show's antecedent is Marx Brothers films. In fact, there's barely anything more of an antecedent to the Goon Show than
the Marx Brothers, yes.
And specifically the verbal comedy of Groucho and Chico, which just recurs over and over again. I don't know if you ever lifted a gag. I've never noticed that, but certainly the Goon Show.
I can imagine Blood Knot could very easily have done that. Last night I shot an elephant in my pyjamas gag. It's absolutely his kind of game.
The jokes often work in exactly the same way, and they. And so, I was recognisable to me via the Goon Show. And there's always a slightly uneven quality to the films because they're not directed by the world's top directors. They're not produced by the world's top producers.
Well, they were when they went to MGM, briefly.
Well, okay,
I mean, I'll just have to say very briefly for historical purposes.
Yeah.
Irving Thalberg took them over from Paramount to MGM.
Right.
And he was the wunderkind, if you like.
Oh, okay.
And he set up this new format for them, which was essentially, let's take a conventional story, with various actors and singers and love stories, and then insert the Marx Brothers into them in much more containable boxes.
Yeah.
So it's still about the Marx Brothers, but the Marx Brothers are now contained. Whereas actually in things like the Paramount films, they own the whole thing.
But we're not talking about auteur-directed stuff. We're talking about
the Hitchcock's Marx Brothers.
Yes. I mean, that would have been amazing.
Oh yes.
It would have been. I'm sorry we've missed out on that now. Actually, to be honest, I'm already regretting it.
When you said Hollywood Cats, I didn't know you meant like Psycho.
Him as Norman Bates would have just been something else, wouldn't it? That's Freudian slip when you say one thing and mean a mother.
Yeah.
That's
I know my mother well. I never knew my father. I'm not sure my mother did.
Yes, which is from Animal Crackers, isn't it? So there's a little bit of scrappiness to them, and in the sense you sort of sense that the characters that surround the Marx Brothers are stock characters.
Yes.
And that they're not deeply written, or they don't have their arcs. I mean, maybe you're right what you're saying about MGM, but even there I'm not sure you sort of see the most profound.
Oh no. And even then, the thing about Irving Thalberg is he died after a day at the races and a night at the opera. So those two are considered to be the high watermark of the MGM era. And then afterwards, MGM didn't really know what to do with them. So diminishing returns up to the... Well, eventually, their final film, which is, funny enough, the film I first saw them in as a little boy, Night in Casablanca, which I think is an independent film from 1949. Right. But even then, I recognised in their sort of final fling as the three brothers... But they were silly men doing things as a child. I found, they were anti-establishment, and that was funny.
Stuff that makes you gurgle, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and so yes, I've always met them with enthusiasm. Sometimes I think what you get, especially with these early ones, is that the timing of the material is great. If they just stuck a camera and pointed it at Groucho doing a sketch, which of course is some of the best parts of this, is exactly what that is. He has a sketch with a straight man, the guy who was Abe the fishmonger. I've forgotten the name of the performer, but he It's just a series of feed lines that Groucho just bats back with just incredible expertise. It feels like a sketch that he's done thousands of times, hundreds of times probably on stage, or dozens of times in the 44th Street Theatre. So this is material he was just absolutely fluent with.
I should say, by the way, they did used to time jokes for audience laughter in cinemas, which of course you don't have to worry about in theatre.
No, that's true. So that's an interesting thing, but sometimes in the editing, obviously, there's a certain amount of clumsiness because of the era it's made in. There are jump cuts, there are sort of middle of scene jump cuts that just because they had to go back and pick it up.
We should also say, by the way, that the version we were watching was the unrestored version, which was only restored. It's a pre-Hays Code musical, and then when it was re-released in 1936, it was terribly cut up, and the original version has only recently resurfaced and been released on Blu-ray. And do you know where they found their original copy?
No.
The British Film Institute.
Ah, nice.
Yeah, so we kept the master, it turns out.
Oh, good.
So we were watching the cut version.
So you have to squint a bit to get the full value out of it. So in the same way that you do sometimes with screwball comedies and things like that, because just the grammar of film means that the fact that it's film doesn't disappear into the background, and so you can enjoy the material. But all the same, it's just very enjoyable on that front. I certainly remember Duck Soup, which I've seen. That's the one that's sort of set in the Illyrian Fredonia, the fantasy European
state. Most satirical
state.
of the films, actually.
Yeah, yes. It's very good. I mean, they never go to Chaplin-esque heights of political commentary as he did with The Great Dictator and Modern Times and things like that. But then again, they score their laughs a good deal better, I would say, than Chaplin managed. So it's just, and it's also, I suppose, the other thing about it. I haven't really thought about this before, but of course, because Harpo is a silent movie comedian,
essentially,
it's like the talkies and the silent movies have got together and had this sort of
brainwave,
this baby, as it were, in which Harpo is continuing in the mode of the silent film, the Buster Keatons and the Chaplins and all of those sorts of people, where it's just all about physical performance, and then the Groucho and Chico are doing the other, doing what's the new kind of humour. So that possibly helps to explain the popularity as well, because there was something familiar and something new.
And they were spotted immediately being great. I mean, let's be honest, the closest avatar to Groucho Marx and Harpo Marx, I think, are Bugs Bunny for Groucho, very quick with the comeback. But actually, oddly, early Daffy Duck is Harpo, because in early Daffy Duck films, he's sort of insane, isn't he? He goes woo 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 and jumps around on his head.
Yeah.
So before he becomes a slightly cynical, world weary loser that he becomes in the later Chuck Jones cartoons. But we should talk about Animal Crackers, the film, as a musical, or a compra musical at least, because I think there's a very interesting hidden flavour being offered up, which is or it's not hidden at all, but I don't think is often picked up, and that is Gilbert and Sullivan.
Oh, right, yeah.
And I'm going to be specific, particularly the Mikado. Now, there's a couple of things here. Maury Riskind, who is the co-writer with George Kaufman, is a huge Gilbert and Sullivan fan, and actually got Groucho into Gilbert and Sullivan. And Groucho himself later goes on in American television to do an hour-long version of the Mikado as Coco the Executioner. That's how far Groucho's love went, to actually appear in a GNS on television. I'd love to see it. But the opening sequence of songs has a lot in common with
Gilbert and Sullivan.
And particularly the Mikado. So should we go through the list of the songs in the film? This is.
Yes, okay. So He's One of Those Men is the first number by the Hives and Footmen.
So that is, if you like, your opening number in a standard Gilbert and Sullivan, and indeed almost any musical, where you've got everyone on the stage. This is,
setting the scene for you.
Yeah, we are in a house, and it's a socialite's house, and she's having a party, and there's probably a melody and some rhymes, but that's the song, isn't it? Yeah, it's quite. I mean, that's not very Gilbert and Sullivan.
Basically, you've captured it.
Yeah, but, you've set up the scene.
Well, the key Gilbert and Sullivan technique that's used here is that you effectively have and like anybody who's not sure of how this works or doesn't really know Gilbert and Sullivan, I'm afraid I'm not much of an expert. I've been forced
one.
I certainly haven't been made one, but I've been forced to become more knowledgeable about it over the years. But the one that everybody knows is the Modern Major General.
Yep.
And that is a solo, rather pompous solo character doing a whole series of extremely tortured rhymes and,
clever, I think is the word.
Very clever rhymes.
But patter song, yes, quite.
Yeah, it's a patter song. But every so often, he sort of takes a short breather while the chorus repeats the last 5 lines he's sung.
With many cheerful news about the square of the hypotenuse.
That's right, exactly. It just sort of typifies the era of that sort of late 19th, turn of the century type of operetta that I'm so and so and I'm so and so, and then the chorus goes
He's so and so,
he's so and so.
so.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So
I will just make a brief observation. You're absolutely right, and that is how their legacy is. It actually turns out, if you look at the full sequence of Gilbert and Sullivan drops that towards the end of the run anyway.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly, because he's moved on
He's old
himself.
hat, yeah.
Exactly. But you're right, it's what everyone remembers, and when you're spoofing GNS, that's what you do.
Yeah.
Or if you're paying homage, which is what I think is going on here. So, as you say, we've got the opening number.
I'll tell you where you also see it for the more modern viewers as well, like in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where the she's going to tell, he's going to tell, he's going to tell, that sort of thing. Anyway, sorry.
Basically an echoing chorus.
Yeah.
We've had the opening.
We have also, I represent the Captain Zeppo, which is a bit of what you'd call recitative in opera.
Yes, and in Gilbert and Sullivan, that is the character coming on to tell you that the character you'll want to see is about to come on.
Yes.
And that's exactly what Zeppo does. He is Horatio Jameson, who is Groucho's, or Captain Spaulding's sort of personal assistant.
Yep.
Now, he's coming to tell them that the guest they're looking for is here. So he's the equerry, if you like, or the person coming ahead. And that's a very standard thing. So this might very well be Pish Tush in the Mikado.
Oh, okay.
It says, well, if you wish to speak to the executioner, he's coming along now. Or
Behold the Lord High
Pooh Bah.
Executioner, is it?
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Which is exactly the avatar we're getting here.
Yeah.
Because the next song is...
Hooray for Captain Spaulding. So this is the big number.
Yeah. Hooray for Captain Spaulding, the African explorer.
Yeah.
So what is happening here is the audience, the people in the party are waiting for the arrival of the guest of honour.
Yeah.
In the Mikado, we have them all singing, Behold the Lord High Executioner, a man of noble rank and title, and they're all waiting for him to come through the door. So it's exactly that song. So what we got next?
So then there's Hello, I Must Be Going.
Which is Groucho coming out and telling you who he is in a song. And in this, he's a man of contradictions. Hello, I must be going. It's also disdainful. I've got here, I don't like it, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
In Coco, the executioner's case, he's now walked on. Sometimes in modern productions, it takes him more than one time. They have to sing it more than once for repeated comedy. So he doesn't turn up.
Oh, I see.
So they all do it again, and then he
so
comes
like,
in.
Here he is.
Yeah. And then... Which we get an element here. Yeah, so Coco sings a song about how he got to be where he is, and you get to see immediately in that song, taken from the county jail by a set of curious chances. It's the story of how a humble tailor by accident reaches this high office. It's not the same journey, but it's the same concept. They are absolutely stealing from GNS here. So he's sung his little individual Groucho song in the middle of the introductory song.
Yeah.
So he's finished singing his little Here I Am, I'm Captain Spaulding song.
And then there's a basic reprise, Hooray for Captain Spaulding Part 2.
Because if you remember rightly, the joke there is he's trying to make a speech and they keep interrupting him.
Yes.
But to sing his praises, and he gets irritated. In the Mikado, Katisha later on turns up, and she has some burning news to reveal who Nanki Poo is.
Right.
And in order to stop her actually giving the reveal, one of the characters gets the entire cast to sing a song that drowns her out repeatedly until she has to go away. This is all stolen from the Mikado. And if that doesn't put the tin lid on it, there's one extra fact, which is when Ravelli turns up, if you remember rightly, he's in the orchestra, as we were saying earlier, he is clutching a trombone, which is what Nanki Poo carries on stage because he is a second trombone in the Titty Poo Town Band.
There you go.
I am absolutely convinced that Maury Riskin has just said, I'm having this, I'm having this, I'm having this, I'm having this. And I know it works because it's been working for 40 years.
Yes. Oh, there you go. Okay, so there's that opening sequence. And then the remaining songs, Why Am I So Romantic, Arabella and John, and it says, and as a harp interlude with harpo as well.
Now, do you remember this? Now, no, exactly. This is the problem. This is where your definition of... So we've had that opening 5-10 minutes, which is absolutely straight out of an operetta.
There's a very similar thing, sorry to sidetrack, but there's a very similar thing about Fredonia, isn't there, in Hail to Fredonia?
Yes.
I can't remember if it comes at the beginning or halfway through Duck Soup, but it's a sequence where, again, those sort of conventions of where he basically has to tell the chorus to shut up.
Yes.
And,
well, it works.
Will you be quiet? Sort of thing, I feel like that's a trope that I've seen in lots of other things. Well, probably a lot of stage shows.
It could. Once again, though, there's a sequence in the Mikado which is actually dialogue where Coco is trying to soliloquise, and every time he does it, someone comes onto stage to speak to him, and he actually says to the audience, "Am I never to be allowed to soliloquise?" It's that knowing, but that's so Groucho as well. That's you know, and I know it's Frankie Howard.
Yes, no, there's no doubt that. Well, okay, if we're tracing the humour back, then Milligan back to the Marx Brothers, and then back to Gilbert.
Yes, I mean, it's all a family, isn't it?
Yeah.
But then we go on to this other strange thing, where there's an enormous period where there's very little music or song. And then we get a very insipid couple. They're the young couple. They're only in it as the young man is an artist, but no one will recognise him. And so his plot, devised by his his missus, who's a damn sight more spunky than he is. Yeah. She was great and he was dull. But
they're a standard musical comedy couple, really, aren't they?
Yes, but I was really pleased that she was the dynamic, and he was just young and handsome, but she was he wasn't even that handsome, but in the scheme of things, he was young and handsome, and she was the sparky one. You know who's going to wear the trousers when they get married.
Yeah.
So she has the idea about substituting the picture. So that's the picture plot brought back in from the stage show, and then they sing this song, which is a love song, but she sings it with gusto, and he sings it like he's a dead crooner.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, it's underlined, isn't it, by Harpo, who has a big old harp solo on it.
He does, yes, that's true. And we also have I'm Daffy Over You, which is Chico.
Yeah, and you know this as...
now, interestingly, it says here, the refrain is sometimes confused with the 1950s song Sugar in the Morning.
Which is what we both thought it was.
Yes.
Sugar in the morning,
well,
sugar in the evening.
I didn't know, and that's what you mentioned, but actually, it is quite similar. Da 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 dum. This is the bit that differs, I think. Da 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 dum bum. And then he has a little
He elaborates, doesn't he?
Yeah, and then because it sort of gets round to a point where he's like, well, I wonder what happens next. He then just hits the first part again and go da 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 dum. And at which point they start sort of Groucho, representing the audience. Like, I wonder when he's going to actually play, like, start singing, basically. And Groucho, I think he just says, when you come around again, maybe you can hop off or something like that. It's
because it just becomes it can't stop, can it? Because he doesn't know the ending.
I already knew that sequence from again, they did it in the radio series and with all those sort of witticisms, and I think they actually expand on it as well. Actually, so it's a longer sequence in the radio thing. But it's a brilliant concept of just like, I just don't know how to continue this piece, so I'm just going to start again from the top.
He actually says it though, doesn't he? After a couple of times round, Chico says, I forgot how it ended.
Yeah, exactly. We also have Silver Threads Among the Gold, which is Chico.
Yes, now he has an extended sequence on the piano. He does the Sugar in the Morning moment, if you like.
Or whatever it is.
Daffy.
I'm Daffy Over You.
But, which is interesting, isn't it, bearing in mind that Harpo is the one who then becomes Daffy Duck.
Yeah.
But not in 1930, he doesn't. This is his extended sequence. He then does... That piece is a comedy piece because he can't end it, and they all get bored.
By the way, sorry to interrupt, but on the title confusion over whether it's Sugar in the Morning or I'm Daffy Over You, further confusion is added by the way it's introduced by Groucho, who says... Ravelli will now play Somewhere My Love Lies Sleeping with a male chorus.
Which, how that got through the Hays Code cuts, I do
not
know.
Yeah.
And that's a Murray Lloyd kind of gag, she sits amongst the cabbages and peas.
Right, okay, yeah.
That's that joke, isn't it? It's the unexpected ending of a sentence.
Yeah.
So it's his double. He gets a double piano solo. Basically, he gets the comedy solo because he can't get off the number, and then he plays the song, which is the Victor Herbert song.
Silver Threads Among the Gold.
Yeah, which is a famous song, and that's his shooting number, isn't it? Yes. That's if you like his virtuoso moment.
It's by Rexford and Danks.
Ah.
But yes, that's right. Yeah. So there's that. There's also a brief piano interlude by Harpo.
Yeah, he jumps on the piano briefly.
Oh yes, that's right. And then we only have two remaining numbers here: Gypsy Chorus, Akka Anvil Chorus, which is Chico.
And I don't even remember that.
No,
so that I think that might have been a throwaway.
Short, yes. And then finally, My Old Kentucky Home by the Marx Brothers.
I don't remember them singing that either. You see, my
old cut from the version we got.
But it's either cut or it's actually being listed as a song, even though it's a throwaway. Because actually, I can imagine him going bam, 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 bam,
yeah,
and that's it.
Oh yes, no,
exactly. It's in it.
There's a thing where someone's banging. It's in the same sequence.
Yeah, there's some kind of ambient noise, isn't there, where they then sort of sing the anvil chorus along as a brief moment, as a joke.
Yeah, because
so it's not actually
almost,
but you wouldn't call it a musical number. It's a cameo, if you like, musically.
Exactly.
And that's it musically. So as a
there's no finale.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, the finale is very strange. It's very different, as I said, from them playing cards down the road as a kind of reveal. If you remember rightly, it's very strange. Harpo sends everyone to sleep with kind of sort of an airbound drug.
Yeah. Because
they're all being chased by the police.
Oh, yes.
And then he's left alone with the woman he's been chasing. I must say, the difference between his chases and Benny Hill trying to chases is that he does... Chico, when everyone thinks of the gender politics of men chasing women because they fancy them, which is terrible.
Not particularly very good much, yeah.
But, this is an early example of it. They do it at full pelt. That woman is running at top speed and they are running... It's like a sprint.
Well, I think this is what... I don't know about this the gender politics of that, as you say, are not particularly
edifying,
contemporary.
Yeah.
But I think the thing I like most about the Marx Brothers is the speed.
Yeah.
Like, I think they do everything quicker. Like, you associate like hoary old-fashioned comedy and bad comedy with just sort of going along at a ponderous pace and
showing you what
laugh.
they're doing that's being funny rather than just letting it be funny.
And actually, that's why Margaret Dumont does stand up, because she does mug a lot of her reactions.
Yeah.
Whereas it's just so quick that you almost miss it.
Yeah.
You know, and also that there's just, as you say, there's this level of extremity, of abandon.
Yeah.
So while you can have a witty put down, there's certain kinds of writers who do it in a way that's slightly kind.
Yeah.
Joyce Grenfell writes, like, she sometimes aims a little barb at her subjects, but it's a very kind barb.
Yeah.
It's not. It's affectionate. It's gentle. It doesn't take any. It doesn't.
It's almost instructive.
Yeah. It doesn't. It's not meant to bring them down.
No.
But Marx Brothers' humour and Spike Milligan's humour,
Yeah.
absolutely is meant to puncture and wound and devastate and completely destroy the status of the target, basically. And obviously, but when you say that, the gender politics of chasing women like until an inch of their lives does rather come into relief. But and I think that's what I loved about it. It was a bit like Tom Lehrer, you know. There's just a total destructive abandon to them.
There's some acid in it.
They just don't care like what the consequences are, and almost people could get, you know.
And yet the reason they never have their lights punched out is because actually they're so ridiculous themselves.
Yes.
And what that takes you back to, of course, and this is an even older school of comedy, is the court jester. The one person who has, you know, we've forgotten the court jesters are often thought of as fools who told jokes, but what they actually were, they were allowed to be the licensed tongue of the court and reflect back to the monarch or whoever was employing them.
Yeah, that's right.
The weaknesses and foibles of that court.
Although again, they had to be very.
There was a line to be
drawn. A lot of them
yes.
got executed, but also the other thing is that I can't remember who said it. There's a famous quote about camp, and camp isn't making. The quote is, I'm sorry, I can't remember who said it.
It's usually Susan Sontag, isn't it?
It should be. No, I think it's actually it was a drag queen, but I can't remember who. Or Christopher Isherwood, one of the two. Anyway, so you have like camp is the lie that tells the truth, which is somebody who said it respected, but also you can make fun of something, but camp is making fun out of something.
Oh, I like that.
That's very good, isn't it? And but of course, the Marx Brothers are the exact opposite.
Yeah.
They don't make fun out of or with their subjects.
No.
They make fun of their subjects. There's absolutely no compassion in their humour, and that's what makes it so enjoyable, because it's so it's such a, for people who are kind of a bit unassuming and terrified of giving offence, and I'm one of those.
Or standard British people.
Yeah, or British as they're otherwise known. The Marx Brothers are brilliant because they don't care how much offence they give.
Terribly cathartic.
They just say the thing. That's right. They say the thing that is unbelievably rude in the circumstances,
and get away with it. That's
also,
the point.
We talked about Gilbert as being an antecedent of that. I would say that Gilbert's a little bit kinder in his kind of humour.
He can be,
but Lewis Carroll is not.
Fair point.
Lewis Carroll is the other antecedent, I think, of Groucho Marx as well as Gilbert, because he knows how to let a line off like that with absolute abandon and with total cruelty, but also wit.
And do you know they both there's another.
And do you know why Lewis Carroll did that? So it's because he, you know, his great inspiration was these very young girls who, of course, children are uncensored. They're not afraid to just say the thing. Say you look funny, you look strange, you know, whatever the thing is. They're not afraid to do it. So it's a version of that childhood's id, you know, coming out.
He was also a clergyman, wasn't he, as well? So
yes, so of course he was highly sensible of. Like, he wrote. Lewis Carroll wrote an etiquette guide for young gentlemen, you know, which was satirical, and it was sort of. And so, for example, I don't remember much of the quotes from it, but I remember laughing aloud a lot of them. And one of my favourites was. The practice of kicking the shins of the gentleman sitting opposite you is a practice wholly exploded. and I read this via a commentator, Kamapalia, and she said the use of that word exploded is really critical in this, because it shows this whole sort of explosion of rudeness in the midst of decorum and correctness and so on. But literally to belt someone in the shins is the opposite of that, isn't it? and of course it's childhood. It's what you learn.
Yeah.
And you learn table manners. You learn not to bang your feet against the bottom of the chair. You learn not to sort of extract things from your mouth while
Yes.
you're halfway through chewing them, and all of these things. Anyway, sorry.
It's the birth of the veneer of etiquette, but underneath it is the seething, cantankerous.
So it's not adult humour. It is very. It's it's in the same way as we get with Mozart, with all of the people who really want to sort of express the unexpressible. That's the kind of humour you get.
But I'm going to go back to Gilbert, but hand in hand with Carol, because actually there's another avatar in both their works, which feeds directly into Mrs. Rittenhouse, actually, and that is the battle axe character. Gilbert always has, I'm sorry to say, an older woman who is actually often treated quite badly, but then quite often gets the prize. I mean, Katisha marries Coco.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I mean, in the Mikado, that's the one we've been talking about. But of course, the Queen of Hearts is battle axe supreme.
Oh, I mean, and the Duchess as well, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So now, Mrs. Rittenhouse is a kind of battle axe. Now, she's not a shouty one at all. So she's,
No.
But she does get cross, and she rules the roost.
Yes.
Is what she does. She still rules the roost.
She's
So
not-
she stops the
She's
bridge
not a
game.
martinet, but
No, she's not.
She's actually sort of
She's not a martyr either.
she's quite a benign character who's just generally trying to sort of make progress in her social ambitions. That's all she's trying to do. So she doesn't almost doesn't take it personally when.
Well, I don't think she can. She seems
No.
ill-equipped to be able to take it at
that's
all.
right,
Yes.
yeah. But yeah, so she's more exasperated than perhaps the Queen of Hearts. But yes, you're right. She has this sort of strong Florence Foster Jenkins vibe almost, doesn't she? That
She absolutely does.
she's not. That said, she's not deluded about her own talents. She's ploughing a furrow that's sort of perfectly logical. She would have been representative of all of the sort of theatrical backers and the women of leisure and the people like that who would have typified the New York social scene.
The ladies who lunch.
The ladies who lunch.
Yeah.
Because in effect, those are the people that that you would have gone to and would have just had wouldn't necessarily have been women of a special talent,
No.
or wit, or verve, or anything like that, but who had their place in society and probably quite a wealthy husband, and had to plough that furrow. So yeah, she sort of is a good avatar of that.
I think there's one more thing to say about Animal Crackers, and particularly a hooray for Captain Spaulding, which became essentially Groucho Marx's theme tune for the rest of his career.
In fact, they use it in the radio series Flywheel, Shasta Flywheel. Yeah,
it's entirely appropriate. But there were a couple of stories. Groucho Marx and Margaret Dumont recreated the arrival of Captain Spaulding on American television in the 1950s, I think.
Okay, yeah.
And I know it exists because I've seen it on YouTube. Whether it's still up, I wouldn't like to say. But it's very interesting to watch them 30 years on from the film
doing the same material.
And of course now they're both older, and she's much more like a socialite, funnily enough. You think old and rich. And then the lovely story is that when Groucho Marx was doing You Bet Your Life, I think it was, the American TV program that he did and radio program he did for many,
I love
many
my
years.
cigar, but I occasionally take it out of my mouth.
The apocryphal story is one of them. They apparently they always wanted to get Margaret Dumont on, and she wouldn't do it unless they paid her. Anyway, somehow they came to some arrangement where she did turn up, and he said it was wonderful, and we got Margaret Dumont, and she appeared on television, and then she died 4 days later or something like that. It really was her swan song with Groucho. So, as you said earlier, that she is sort of the fourth Marx Brother.
Yeah.
And she has the longer Marx Brother career than Zeppo, certainly.
Yeah.
And here we are talking, we've spoken much more about... and I like Zeppo, but he's never given enough to do. He's got 2 scenes in this. Groucho's coming, and Take a Letter, Horatio Jennison.
He didn't fit. And also like a fourth person, well, other than Margaret Dumont, throws out the dynamic. Talking of some of the witticisms, there are...
Legion.
There are legion. There's the one that you started with. One morning I shot an elephant in my pyjamas. How I got in my pyjamas, I don't know, which is the actual quote. Apparently, the American Film Institute, according to Wikipedia, listed this at number 53 in the 100 greatest movie quotes of all time. I mean, I think it's a good joke. I don't think it's my favourite Marx Brother joke by any manner of means.
No, but do you know? I'll tell you what it is. It's
a very classic format of a joke.
But it's also a joke which has survived in the sense that actually, even to this day, you could stick that in Animaniacs. And people will get it.
Later on here, then we tried to remove the tusks, but they were embedded in too firmly. We couldn't budge them. Of course, in Alabama, the Tuscaloosa.
Which is
but that's entirely irrelevant to what I was talking about. It says similar to a joke Chico would later tell in Duck Soup, and that's right. It's irrelevant. He does it the other way around.
Yes.
They use the word irrelevant, and he says it's not irrelevant. It's a whatever. Oh no, that's Flanders and Swan, isn't it? It's
Yeah, but he's quoting.
It's not irrelevant. It's a hippopotamus. Oh, is he? Is that?
I think he's being Groucho.
It's
in that.
via. Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Africa is God's country, and he can have it. We took some pictures of the native girls, but they weren't developed. But we're going back in a couple of weeks. That's
You
why
wouldn't
we
do
can't
that
do that
now.
now. No, exactly. It's very witty though. And then other quotes from Groucho. There's 5 of them here. Ever since I met you, I've swept you off my feet. Now, to me, that's brilliant.
Yes.
I much prefer that to
And
the
it's a
elephant
beautiful
gag.
inversion, isn't it?
It's a beautiful inversion, and it's just so utterly insulting.
Yes.
It's like I never forget a face, but in your case, I'll make an exception,
Yes.
which is my all-time favourite.
And Groucho
and my
again.
dad's all-time favourite as well. You mind if I don't smoke?
Yes. And that's just mad surrealism, isn't it?
Yeah.
Asking permission not to smoke.
There's always one thing I've wanted to do before I quit: retire. Which you just can't you can't work it out.
But you know who does that kind of thing now? Not in the same delivery. Is it Dylan Moran once said a joke. He said, "Do you know once 2 out of 3 people don't know what the other one's doing," or something like that. But you have to know how to deliver it, and because it doesn't actually mean anything.
No.
But you can invest it with something that sounds like there's a meaning, and that's one of those.
That's absolutely right. And then the one you're going to have to explain this one to me because I don't really get it. Didn't you ever see habeas corpus? Says Groucho. Chico, no, but I see habeas Irish rose.
Well, there's a song called Abe's Irish Rose.
That'll be it.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Good. That's the one. That's the only one I didn't get out of those classic lines. There's many others, but those are those are the favourites that are picked out on Wikipedia for that film.
So overall, I mean, we made this observation. We watched Animal Crackers in 2021, a mere 91 years after it was filmed.
Yes.
And yet we laugh like drones all the way
these
through.
things take a long time to come through to the UK. That's the trouble.
The trouble with distribution and everything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But we thought, after 91 years, this is a comedy that's still sparkling and crackingly funny.
Yeah.
And still electrically crackling, because it's still relevant somehow.
Provided you look at the Marx Brothers bits and you sort of ignore the rest of the fluff that's around it, you know.
But you wouldn't watch it for that anyway.
Good grief, no.
Who would watch the Animal Crackers? Oh, I don't like the Marx Brothers, but I'm an enormous fan of...
Yes. Plots about paintings being copied and
quite.
substituted, yeah. Yeah, no, it is fantastic, and they're one of those acts like Chaplin that will live forever, and it's just a question of whether Star Wars will ever pick up on the necessity to include
a Groucho character
in episodes 10, 11 and 12 when they eventually come around.
Luke, actually, I'm your father.
I mean, yes, I can see it. I can definitely see it working.
At least that's what she told me.
Yes, very good.
It's all in the timing, you know.
It's all in the timing, yeah.
So, and we've been concentrating today on just one Marx Brothers film.
Yes, that is their film, and if you don't like it, they have others.
I'm liking your work, Mr. Timo.
Yes, Timo Marx. Well, I've had a wonderful evening, but this wasn't it.
Yes, well, Bugs Bunny used to use one like that, didn't he? He said, don't think this hasn't been a little slice of heaven, because it hasn't.
Musical talk. And there we are. That's Animal Crackers, I think, well and truly wrapped up. And I do hope you enjoyed these 2 episodes talking about the Marx Brothers through the prism of their career as musical theatre and musical film performers. It's a side of their career that, on the whole, people don't think about. But it is actually a really important part of who they were and what they did. Now, Groucho Marx himself said that Margaret Dumont, who we've mentioned, was practically the 5th Marx brother. So I think it does us well to have a very quick look at her career. She was born in 1882 and died at the age of 82 in 1965. And that encompasses quite a lot of history, not least the invention of the film and Hollywood. She originally started as an operatic singer and appeared both in America and in Europe, and was already a soubrette by the beginning of the 20th century. A soubrette being, if you like, the woman in the secondary comedy role in a lot of musical theatre. She went on to appear on Broadway in a number of shows, mostly musical comedies, called The Fan, 1921, Go Easy Mabel, 1922, The Rise of Rosie O'Reilly in 1923, and The Four Flusher in 1925. But of course, the big year for her was a century ago in 1925, after The Four Flusher, when she was cast in The Coconuts, which was the Marx Brothers' first fully fledged musical, which we touched on last week, the one with the score by Irving Berlin. And so marvellous was she in her role there, playing the rich widow Mrs. Potter, But she was then cast as Mrs. Rittenhouse in Animal Crackers and went on to play against the Marx Brothers on a number of occasions. She was in The Coconuts, Animal Crackers, Duck Soup, A Night at the Opera, A Day at the Races, At the Circus and The Big Store. And she even won Best Supporting Actress Award for her role in A Day at the Races. And she didn't just provide comedy foil for the Marx Brothers, she also worked with Laurel and Hardy, Abbott and Costello, Danny Kaye, Jack Benny, W.C. Fields and Red Skelton, who later on would play Harry Ruby, the lyricist of all the songs, in Animal Crackers. And she appeared on television with Martin and Lewis. And as you heard in the episode, it was 8 days before she died that she last appeared on television in Hollywood Palace, where she was reunited with Groucho Marx, who was the host for that week, where they performed a scene from Animal Crackers, rather wonderfully. It's the scene where Captain Spaulding finally arrives, and everyone sings the song Hooray for Captain Spaulding by Kalmar and Ruby. And you can find a copy of that show, because it was recorded, if you look online. And what I find amazing is that Margaret Dumont was a woman who lived long enough into the 20th century to see all the styles and changes of musical, and was even able to turn up in a 1956 rock and roll musical as a character called Georgiana Fitzdingle, which is as good a name as you're going to find in any piece of fiction, inside or outside the canon of the Marx Brothers, in the film called Shake, Rattle and Rock. It may not have been a terribly good film, but my goodness, what a career. That was Margaret Dumont, whose appearance in a Marx Brothers film always makes it better. Well, that brings this episode of Musical Talk to an end. Thank you so much for listening. I do hope you'll join us again next week, or whenever, when we'll be talking about, well, who knows what. And that is the joy of this programme. Musical theatre and musical film is such a broad canvas, but there's so much to talk about. Join us next week and find out what. But for the time being, it's time to say goodbye. And appropriately, I'm going to do it this week in the style of Harpo Marx. This episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2025. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your favourite podcasts. And follow us on all the usual social media networks.
The secret of life is honesty and fair dealing. If you can fake that, you've got it made. Either this man is dead or my watch has stopped.
They're all good, aren't they?
They're great.
Woo, 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 woo.